Hey beautiful souls, welcome back to the Daily House. I'm absolutely thrilled you're joining me today as we dive into one of my favorite seasonal transformations. We're exploring how Anthropologie's signature bohemian meets vintage aesthetic can breathe new life into your farmhouse spaces this fall. From weathered textures to curated vintage finds, we'll discover how to create that effortlessly collected look that feels both sophisticated and wonderfully lived in. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up if you're ready to fall in love with full farmhouse design. Let's start where first impressions matter most, your home's exterior. Anthropologie's approach to full farmhouse facades is all about layered textures and unexpected elements. Think weathered wood shutters paired with vintage brass hardware, complemented by oversized planters filled with burgundy mums and trailing ivy. The key is embracing imperfection, that perfectly imperfect patina that tells a story. Consider adding a vintage wooden bench near your entrance, styled with worn leather cushions and a collection of varied-sized pumpkins. This creates what designers call visual weight, drawing the eye and creating anticipation for what lies beyond your front door. Your entryway sets the tone for your entire home, and Anthropologie knows this better than anyone. Start with a foundation of warm, weathered wood, perhaps a reclaimed barn door or shiplap accent wall. The beauty lies in the imperfections and natural green patterns that speak to farmhouse authenticity. Layer in vintage-inspired lighting, like an oversized lantern or Edison bulb fixture, to create ambient warmth. Rich, earthy paint colors like sage green or warm taupe provide the perfect backdrop for fall's golden hues. Remember, this space should feel collected over time, not purchased in one shopping trip. Storage doesn't have to sacrifice style. Especially when channeling Anthropologie's aesthetic, opt for a vintage-inspired coat rack made from reclaimed wood and wrought iron. Or install floating shelves with aged brass brackets. The magic happens in the details. Think hand-forged hooks that look like they've been there for decades. Style your coat storage with a mix of everyday jackets and decorative elements like vintage scarves or a weather wooden sign. This approach, called styled functionality, ensures your practical pieces contribute to your overall design story rather than detracting from it. Anthropologie excels at turning everyday storage into art pieces. For keys and small essentials, consider a vintage wooden dough bowl or an antique brass tree placed on a weathered console table. Hat storage becomes decor when you use aged wooden pegs or vintage co-hooks mounted at varying heights. The key principle here is collected eclecticism, mixing different materials, ages, and textures to create visual interest. A small vintage mirror above your key area not only serves a practical purpose, but also reflects light, making your entryway feel larger and more welcoming. Shoe storage in an Anthropologie-inspired entryway should feel intentional yet effortless. Consider a vintage wooden bench with built-in cubbies, or repurpose an old wooden crate as a charming shoe storage solution. The beauty is in the weathered finishes and natural imperfections that tell a story. Style the top of your shoe storage with seasonal elements like small pumpkins, dried wheat bundles, or vintage brass candlesticks. This layered approach creates what designers call purposeful styling, where every element serves both function and beauty, embodying the farmhouse philosophy that practical can be pretty. Every well-designed entryway needs a place to pause and transition. Anthropologie's approach favors seating with history and character. Think a vintage wooden church pew, an aged leather ottoman, or a weathered bench with turn legs. Layer on textiles with rich textures, a vintage grain sack pillow, a hand-woven throw, or a weathered tapestry cushion. This creates what's known as tactile layering, inviting touch and interaction. Position your seating to create a natural flow while providing a practical spot for putting on shoes or setting down bags. Mirrors in an Anthropologie farmhouse entryway do more than show reflections. They're statement pieces that enhance light and space. Look for mirrors with weathered wood frames, aged brass details, or vintage-inspired shapes like sunbursts or ornate ovals. The frame should feel collected rather than purchased, perhaps with gentle wear marks or naturally aged patina. Position your mirror to reflect natural light from windows or doors, creating what designers call borrowed light, amplifying the warmth and openness of your space while adding depth and dimension. Your entryway floor covering should be both practical and beautiful, embodying Anthropologie's effortless elegance. Layer a durable jute rug with a smaller vintage-inspired doormat, creating texture and visual interest. Look for pieces with natural fibers, subtle patterns, or aged appearances that complement your farmhouse aesthetic. The layering technique, called rug nesting, adds depth and helps define different zones within your entryway. Choose colors that echo your full palette: warm browns, sage greens, or muted golds that feel organic and intentional rather than matchy-matchy. The magic of Anthropologie's aesthetic lies in thoughtfully curated decorative elements that feel personal and collected. For fall, incorporate vintage brass candlesticks with pillar candles, weathered wooden bowls filled with seasonal gourds, or antique books stacked casually at console table. The key principle is edited abundance, having enough elements to create interest without overwhelming the space. Mix heights, textures, and materials to create visual rhythm. A vintage wooden sign, dried wheat bundle, or collection of small pottery pieces can transform your entryway into a welcoming vignette. Moving into your living room, Anthropologie's farmhouse approach creates spaces that feel effortlessly elegant yet completely comfortable. Start with foundational pieces that have character: a weathered wood coffee table, vintage leather seating, or a reclaimed wood mantel. The key is choosing pieces that look like they've been collected over time rather than purchased as a set. Layer in textiles with rich textures and warm colors that echo full's natural palette. This approach, known as collected comfort, creates living spaces that invite lingering and feel authentically personal. The secret to Anthropologie's living room magic lies in thoughtful layering of textures and vintage elements. Drape hand-woven throws over weathered leather chairs. Mix vintage and new pillows in complementary fall tones, and style surfaces with collected treasures like antique brass objects or weathered pottery. Incorporate natural elements like dried pampers grass in vintage crocks or branches in tall ceramic vessels. This creates what designers call organic luxury, spaces that feel refined yet completely approachable, perfect for both everyday living and special gatherings. Your dining room becomes a celebration of fall when styled with Anthropologie's signature mix of vintage and organic elements. Start with natural linen table runners in warm, earthy tones. Then layer in vintage brass candlesticks, weathered wooden bowls, and seasonal elements like small pumpkins or dried wheat bundles. Mix different textures and heights to create visual interest. This technique is called table skipping. The goal is creating a setting that feels special yet approachable, where the beauty lies in the imperfect perfection of collected, loved pieces rather than formal matching sets. Anthropologie's approach to dining furniture celebrates pieces with history and character. Think weathered farmhouse tables with visible grain and gentle wear marks, paired with mismatched vintage chairs that tell individual stories. The beauty lies in the imperfections and patina that speak to years of family gatherings. Layer in vintage textiles like grain sack table runners or hand-woven placemats. This approach, known as curated eclecticism, creates stunning spaces that feel personal and welcoming rather than formal and untouchable. Each piece should contribute to your home story. Your kitchen becomes the heart of full entertaining when styled with Anthropologie's warm, collected aesthetic. Focus on open shelving that displays vintage crockery, weathered cutting boards, and seasonal elements like gourds and dried herbs. Choose cabinet hardware with aged finishes, brass or wrought iron that looks collected over time. The key is balancing function with beauty, ensuring every visible element contributes to your overall design story. This approach creates what designers call working beauty, kitchens that are both highly functional and visually stunning. Integrating modern appliances into an Anthropologie-inspired farmhouse kitchen requires thoughtful selection and styling. Choose appliances in vintage-inspired finishes like cream, sage green, or classic black that complement rather than compete with your vintage elements. Style around your refrigerator with vintage cutting boards, seasonal wreaths, or collected pottery. Your coffee area becomes a vignette with vintage mugs, weathered wooden trays, and perhaps a small plant in an aged terracotta pot. The goal is seamless integration where modern convenience meets timeless charm. Your family room should embody the ultimate in cozy comfort while maintaining Anthropologie's sophisticated edge. Layer vintage-inspired furniture with soft textiles in fall's rich palette, think burgundy, sage, and warm amber tones. Style around your television with vintage books, collected pottery, and seasonal elements that don't compete for attention. The key is creating what designers call comfortable elegance, spaces that are both beautiful and completely livable. Incorporate vintage-inspired lighting like aged brass table lamps or Edison bulb fixtures to create warm, inviting ambience. Creating a home office space within your farmhouse requires balancing productivity with Anthropologie's signature vintage charm. Choose a desk with character, perhaps reclaimed wood with visible grain or vintage painted finish that shows gentle wear. Style your workspace with collected vintage elements like an antique brass desk lamp, vintage books used as risers, and perhaps a small vintage radio for ambient charm. The goal is creating what's known as inspired functionality, spaces that motivate creativity while serving practical needs. Every element should contribute to both productivity and visual appeal. A reading nook in your farmhouse becomes a sanctuary when styled with Anthropologie's layered, collected aesthetic. Create a cozy corner with vintage-inspired seating, perhaps a weathered leather chair or vintage wooden bench with soft cushions. Layer in textiles with rich textures and warm colors that invite curling up with a good book. Add elements like vintage brass bookends, a weathered wooden side table for your teacup, and soft lighting from an aged brass reading lamp. This creates what designers call a personal retreat, spaces that nurture both comfort and creativity. Transform your bedroom into a full sanctuary with Anthropologie's signature mix of vintage charm and cozy comfort. Layer vintage-inspired linens in warm, earthy tones with hand-woven throws and mixed pillow textures. Choose furniture pieces with character, perhaps a weathered wooden headboard or vintage-inspired nightstands with gentle wear marks. The key is creating what's known as layered serenity, spaces that feel both restful and visually interesting. Incorporate seasonal elements like branches and vintage vessels or small pumpkins on windowsills to connect your interior with fall's natural beauty. Even your bathroom can embrace Anthropologie's vintage farmhouse aesthetic through thoughtful styling and material choices. Incorporate natural textures like weathered wood vanities, vintage-inspired brass fixtures, and organic elements like plants in each terracotta pots. Style surfaces with collected vintage elements, perhaps antique brass trays for toiletries or weathered wooden bowls for hand towels. The shower area benefits from natural materials like subway tile or stone, the Eco Farmhouse. Authenticity. This approach creates what designers call functional beauty, spaces that serve daily needs while contributing to your home's overall aesthetic story. Your garage becomes an extension of your home's style when approached with Anthropologie's eye for vintage character. Incorporate weathered wood storage solutions, vintage-inspired lighting, and organized displays of tools and seasonal items that become decorative elements themselves. The key is treating this utilitarian space with the same design consideration as interior rooms. Use vintage-inspired hooks, weathered wooden shelving, and perhaps repurposed furniture pieces for storage and workspace. This creates what's known as beautiful utility, spaces that serve practical needs while contributing to your home's overall character and charm. Extend your Anthropologie-inspired farmhouse style to outdoor spaces with weathered furniture, vintage-inspired accessories, and seasonal styling. Choose pieces with character, perhaps weathered wooden furniture, vintage metal planters, or aged wicker seating with soft cushions in fall tones. Layer in seasonal elements like pumpkins, dried corn stalks, and vintage brass lanterns for ambient lighting. The goal is creating outdoor rooms that feel like extensions of your interior spaces, with the same attention to collected vintage charm and comfortable elegance that defines Anthropologie's aesthetic. As we wrap up this journey through Anthropologie-inspired full farmhouse design, remember that the most beautiful homes are those that tell personal stories through collected vintage pieces, natural textures, and thoughtful styling. The key is embracing imperfection and choosing pieces that speak to you rather than following rules too rigidly. Start with one room and gradually layer in elements that feel authentic to your story. Don't forget to subscribe to the Daily House for more design inspiration. Hit that like button if this video sparked your creativity, and share in the comments which space you're most excited to transform this fall.